So as you can see, I just want to give you a little bit of preface of what the webinar focus is going to be today. And so the first thing we're going to do is cover just some common myths surrounding the experience of infidelity and or sex addiction. There are a lot of things that we're battling culturally, a lot of messages that are circulating that are really not helpful for us to hear and adhere to as we journey through our recovery. So we're going to talk about those just a little bit. And then I'm also going to move in and briefly talk about helping you understand infidelity and sex addiction as relational trauma. This is a really important element to this presentation and to understanding couple recovery, that this is a real trauma, and it's not something we're not using that word trauma lightly or just throwing it in there for effect. It is real and it is deep, and we need to understand it as trauma. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to spend most of our time on the last one, which is pursuing and welcoming the new couple relationship. This is what couple recovery is all about. And so I'm going to do my best to help you understand what that process is and some of the phenomenons that are involved in that, so that you can have some direction and also understand it too if you're experiencing some of these things that you might be thinking that you shouldn't be experiencing those, or you're going crazy or things like that, but you're actually experiencing something very normal. And as a therapist, sometimes we see those things. Those are the things we're looking for to see progress in recovery. So we'll go over some of that as well. So let's talk about some of these common myths. And so you can see the 7 myths that I put up there, but I'm going to go through each one of them just real briefly and talk about the importance of really battling against these when you see these pop up, really trying to play whack-a-mole with these as they come up in your life and in your recovery. And so the first common myth, which is very important to debunk, is infidelity or sex addiction only happens in bad relationships. And so, this is really common, especially in new relationships, where someone might think that, if that this would never happen to me. Some people create that illusion for themselves from the get-go, is that infidelity, sex addiction, those things, that would never happen to me. That would never happen to us. And some people that have a little bit more grasp on how the relationships work might recognize that that can happen to them, but as long as we keep our relationship healthy and happy, then it won't. And that's simply not true. Infidelity, sex addiction can happen in all types of relationships. I have a colleague that would always say that we're all one bad decision away from messing up our lives, at least temporarily. And that is true for all of us. In the cases of a single act of infidelity, all it takes is the being in the wrong place at the right time, so to speak, and that stimuli coming together, and then you make a bad decision that will tip your world upside down. And also in the world of sexual addiction, or as we're going to talk about chronic infidelity, a lot of times there's a buildup, and so their world seems put together, seems neat, seems clean, and there's a buildup from past events like trauma and other things such as that will eventually collide, and then all of a sudden they find themselves in a mess, and it seems like it just happened immediately or in one moment's time, but it was actually a buildup that happened in secret. But it doesn't necessarily mean that their lives were bad or their relationships were bad. Those things happen in good relationships as well. It's really important to understand that in moving forward. So let's go to the next one, that relationships cannot survive this type of trauma. So what I would say to that is that I would not be able to keep my doors open if that were the case. I would not be in business. I would not be able to do this work, because we would have to shut the doors fairly quickly, because if people would really quickly realize that we couldn't help them, and they would exit as fast as they came in. And so the fact that you have places like Family Solutions Counseling in Oklahoma City and the Center for Healthy Sex in LA, that those places are able to keep their doors open because we are helping people, and people are surviving, and they're not just surviving, or the relationships aren't just surviving, they're thriving when people are really doing this work. So remember that as you go through this. This next one, you might have heard this adage before that goes, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. A lot of what we call the wounded or the injured spouses, which are the ones that were cheated on or that discovered the infidelity or sex addiction, they often come in feeling very foolish for choosing to stay, especially if it's happened more than one time. And so this adage really resonates with them, but I try to debunk that very quickly, because fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me does not apply when it comes to relationships. And one reason is that if it's important to you, you should be able and have permission to fight for it as long as you feel like you have fight in you. So I encourage you to do that. But secondly, a truly intimate and meaningful relationship means that we actually are putting ourselves in the position to be fooled. And because that's what it means to be vulnerable, is that I'm making myself vulnerable to such a degree with this person that where I would say to them kind of subconscious, or just, it's not something I actually say out loud, but the message we're sending in that state of vulnerability is, you could really hurt me and be doing a lot of things that I'm unaware of that would really hurt me, but I'm going to trust you anyways, at the risk of feeling very foolish if that were to happen. And so whether the relationship you're in where the infidelity or sexual addiction occurred, whether or not that relationship works out and you continue in that relationship and build something new, or you enter into a new relationship, you'll find yourself in this position once again, that if you want to have a meaningful, healthy relationship, you will put yourself in that position. Because one thing that I say to the couples that I'm working with is that the lifeblood of a healthy couple relationship is vulnerability. And so that's what that's reflecting. The next one is another adage that we often hear: once a cheater, always a cheater. And I think this is something that you hear often from our friends and our family. And so when you think about that phrase, you might hear a certain friend whispering in your ear, or that's the voice that you hear. Once a cheater, always a cheater. And that's not true. Even for people that have been caught up in a pattern of infidelity, like chronic infidelity or sexual addiction, yes, that might have been the case for them, but that's not the life that they have to live. A lot of times those people do take control of the narrative. They take control of their story, and they take the power away from the addiction and start living the life that they want to live, which often involves faithfulness and monogamy with longevity to it. And so those people that are dealing with that struggle and that pattern, they don't always have they don't always have to carry that label of being a cheater. And so we need to debunk that myth as quickly as it comes in as well. This other one, it really comes in from the idea, or partners of addicts or who have experienced their spouse cheating on them, often feel like they are never going to get better. That there's some kind of damaged goods now, that it's always going to be like this. And I know it feels like that in the moment, and it might continue. You might continue to, but I do want to reassure you, like when you're doing the work and you're actively pursuing your own recovery, it gets better. And I feel like I can confidently say that for people that are going headstrong into their recovery. So don't don't get wrapped up in those feelings, and let your broken heart convince you that you're never going to recover. These last two are really difficult because there's a lot of ambiguity to them. And so, so I'll just read them out loud. Emotional affairs are not considered infidelity. And so we need to distinguish first the difference between an emotional affair and sexualized attachment, because those are different. And so, emotional affair is when both parties involved are making an emotional exchange and getting that emotional validation from each other in such a way that it's violating to their committed couple relationships that they're currently in. And so there is basically, with emotional affairs, there's awareness on both sides. Sexualized attachment is still damaging, but a little bit more ambiguous because it's usually just one sided. So a lot of times, especially in the world of sexual addiction, the addict might sexualize attached to people really quickly, but that person that they're sexualizing and becoming attached to might never know is actually happening. And so it really, in my mind, doesn't really constitute as an emotional affair, but it definitely is problematic and needs to be addressed. But the ambiguity behind it, of is this infidelity, is it not, is usually really driven by the person that's involved in it. And so that's often a red flag for me. So a lot of times denial is really driving that myth. And the last one has a lot of ambiguity in it. That has to do with online and cyber sex or cyber type relationships. That those aren't infidelity. And so I would venture to say that most people would agree, not all, but most would agree that if someone has taken their cyber relationship to a level where there is actual real-time interaction with that person, like in the form of sexting or webcams and things of that nature, that they're going to consider that some level of cheating or infidelity. Where it really gets sketchy is in the, or gray, I guess, is in the world of pornography. And, is porn cheating? Is it lust? And how does all that work? And I do believe that people do and can and do become addicted to pornography. But even if they're not, I think it's really important for couples in this day and age, and especially in couple recovery, to address the views, the values, the morality of how they see it when it comes to porn and the use of porn. That becomes very important, and each couple really needs to define that, because one thing that I say a lot of times, especially to the wounded partners, is that ambiguity is not your friend. We need to eliminate as much of that in the beginning as we possibly can. So I hope that you'll take these minutes, watch the rebroadcast of this on YouTube, review these, and really consider how much of these have impacted your life and your recovery, because we really want to start playing whack-a-mole with these as they pop up. We really want to work hard at knocking them back down and pursuing the truth. And these things simply they're not good information for us in couple recovery. So let's move forward from that. I got a question about, does Family Solutions offer couples therapy on Skype? And at this point, we do not, and there's some legal issues that we have to face in terms of our licensure. And so, but there's a lot of opportunity online, and I'm actually going, I think at the end of this presentation, I'm going to address that just a little bit. And so I have another question that came in that asks, how long does it take to regain trust? What helps more, polygraph or formal disclosure, if you had to choose? I'm going to address trust in a lot of detail at the end of this presentation. If I forget to bring up the use of polygraph or formal disclosure, because I do think formal disclosure is important no matter what, but whether or not you use polygraph is usually the counselor discretion. Some counselors will, some won't. If whoever wrote that question in, feel free to bring that back up as we tackle that in the trust section of this presentation. And I'll, if I have time, I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. You're also welcome to go to our YouTube channel, where we actually talk about disclosures on our in the blog section of our website at FamilySolutionsOK.com. We write about it a little bit, and we talk a little bit about polygraph as well. So, but if you noticed in the beginning of the presentation, on the heading, the title of this is Couple Recovery, Healing After Chronic Infidelity. And so, the key word there is chronic infidelity, but I want to just real quickly address the word infidelity and define that. So I really like Rob Weiss's definition in his book, Out of the Doghouse. And if you guys don't know who Rob Weiss is, he's got a lot of name recognition in our field, in the field of sex therapy. Writes a lot of good material. And this is a good working definition. And also too, if the video feed breaks out while I'm talking, just hang in there with me. It usually kicks back on really quickly. So what I like about Rob's definition is that it gives us a point to work from, but it's vague enough to where each couple can really add in elements that make it unique to them. So, or he says, infidelity is the breaking of trust that occurs when you keep intimate, meaningful secrets from your primary romantic partner. And I think that's a good working relationship. But what each couple really needs to define for themselves is, what does intimate, meaningful secrets mean? So again, I think most people, again, not all, but most people agree that extramarital affairs is how the literature often defines it, or infidelity, chronic infidelity, sexual addiction, physically acting out with somebody else. Basically, most people are going to consider that a violation to the relationship, and at least most people that adhere to the model of monogamy. And so, but there's still, what other things might be considered infidelity, and that's what the couple really needs to work at defining for themselves. Secrecy is the culprit here. More often than not, I'm hearing the wounded spouse say that this would have been a lot less hurtful, a lot less wounding if it wasn't kept secret from them. So secrecy tends to be the culprit. And most of the secrets that people in couple relationships are keeping, they know intuitively that this information, this thing that I'm keeping from my spouse would be hurtful or harmful. And so, and when they do it anyways, it ends up being even more hurtful and harmful. So couples really need to define that. But when we talk about chronic infidelity, we're often talking about sexual addiction or something in the realm of sexually compulsive behavior. It's not all the time, and I would never venture to assume someone is a sex addict because they have repeated acts of infidelity. But probably a safe assumption is that they are being sexually compulsive. And so what I want everyone to understand is that although we're going to talk real heavily about recovery, couple recovery on the other side of chronic infidelity, sexually compulsive behavior, sexual addiction, a lot of this information is really applicable to people who have experienced a single act of infidelity. And so if you're watching this and that's your story, I encourage you to stay with me on this, stay involved, because I think the information might resonate with you as well. Now, I really like Milton Magnus's definition of stop sex addiction. And in his book, Stop Sex Addiction, if you read that whole chapter, you'll see him say that, so it might be a lot easier to talk about what sex addiction is not, and he makes a really good attempt at that. But he also made a good stab at giving us a working definition. And I like this one: a progressive intimacy disorder whereby a person engages in a pattern of sexual thoughts or behaviors that are destructive, and that person feels he or she is unable to stop. And so that last piece on there, where he illustrates that the feeling that they are unable to stop, that is the thing that really, for a therapist, really wakes us up and starts entertaining the idea that we could be dealing with an addiction here, because that's what addiction is. It's the inability to stop the behavior. And, and even when the addict is not even really receiving a lot of pleasure from the behavior, they continue to do it. And again, that reflects addiction, or what we often call the hijacked brain. And so, if you go to our back to our YouTube channel, we did a video not too long ago called "More Than an Affair," and it was an effort to help people answer this question: is what we're experiencing in a relationship, was that an affair, or are we dealing with something more like sex addiction? And I would encourage you to go back and watch that to get more information, because I'm not going to be able to go into that a lot here today. But I would like you to be kind to us, because this was early on in our YouTube adventure, before we understood, one, the importance of editing, but secondly, just knowing how to do it. But I still think the information that you'll find there, you'll find beneficial and helpful to understanding what you are actually dealing with in your relationship. So it's important to understand that what you're dealing with here, a single act of infidelity or chronic infidelity, the discovery of a sexual addiction, they are forms of relational trauma. You might have also heard that called betrayal trauma. And as I said earlier, we're not throwing the word trauma around for effect. And I think sometimes people think that's actually what we are doing. No, we're talking about a real emotional trauma. It's a deep emotional wound. And it's a type of wound that time isn't simply going to heal. Time is important to consider, but it's what you're doing during that time that really matters. And so I can't express that enough, that if you are on the receiving end of the experience of infidelity, please don't think that you're going crazy, or you're making mountains out of molehills about this, or that you should just get over it. You're dealing with something very serious in that it's wounded you, and it's wounded the relationship, and we need to give proper attention to it. And so, let me go over here. So in the program that we do at Family Solutions, we basically created a model, because we have a team approach model that we use. If a couple comes and works with us at Family Solutions, they usually get a team of people that are working with them. And the way we see it, I know that what you're seeing right now on your screen might be a little complicated, but what I want you to really pay attention to is that there are three entities being treated here. We're working with the individual in therapy, both individuals, the addict and the partner. And as you can see down at the bottom, we are doing couples therapy. So we have to tend to the couple relationship as its own entity. So there are three entities we're working with. And it's very important to tend to all three of those entities. I think for a long time, or at least in years past, the partner of the addict, or the partner who was wounded by the act of infidelity, and sometimes the couple relationship, they often fall through the crack, because the person who cheated, the person who is the addict, they have the problem, they need to go get better, right? And if they get better, then I'll be better and we'll be better. And it sounds good, it sounds logical, but it's not how it works. We could spend a lot of time working with both the individual addict and the individual partner, and helping them make all kinds of advances in their own recovery, and the couple relationships still not get better. We have to tend to that relationship. So another phenomenon that we noticed in doing this work is that sometimes people have spent a lot of time doing their individual therapy, and they have to face their couple relationship recovery. And it's almost as if they've started therapy all over again. It's almost like it's the first time they've entered the therapy room because all that angst is coming back, all the anxiety, the vulnerability, because again, the couple relationship is its own entity. So, when you're seeking out or working at your recovery, you want to make sure that this part of your relationship is getting addressed by your therapist or the program that you're involved in. So I'm going to spend the rest of our time talking about the couple relationship, the experiences that couples go through, and trying to help you understand what is going on in the couple relationship, what makes couple recovery difficult, but I am also going to paint you a picture that'll help you look at couple recovery a little bit differently and maybe even help you feel a little bit more empowered and hopeful in that journey. So let's move forward. So I have a question that has been submitted that through email that says, just a comment. It says, be sure to tell folks about how the World Health Organization now recognizes sex addiction as a true addiction. So that was posted on the comments section, so you could probably see that as well. Thank you for that post. So we're going to spend the rest of the presentation. I'm going to talk about this concept called the liminal state of existence. This is where it gets really good, really interesting. So I hope that you're hanging in there with me. We're going to talk about this idea that I call a transitional distrust. So this is the part where we're going to talk about trust, and then the journey towards self-discovery. So let's start. You might have never heard this word liminal before. It's probably one of my favorite words in working with couples, and my couples probably hear me say this a lot, liminal state of existence. But I went ahead and looked it up in Webster's dictionary, and I really like the second definition they give, in particular the last two words, in between, transitional. So it's an in-between state of existence. It's a transitional state. And what it doesn't say in Webster's dictionary is it's never fun. It's not fun being in that position. So there's a book by Glenn Pemberton called Hurting with God, where he addresses this liminal state of existence. And he says, this is when we are no longer this, but not yet that. Let that sink in for a moment. A point in time when you are no longer this, but not yet that. And that's often how people feel when they're going through this process of couple recovery. So we are caught up by circumstances in an in-between time or space of ambiguity. Remember me saying ambiguity is not your friend. We feel displaced, confused, frustrated, or even angry. We are not certain of who we are, what we are becoming. We only know that life is changing. So I put together this graphic to help you understand this liminal space. So think of it as you have the old world that you came from, and you're transitioning into the new world. And so there's this space in between, right? That's your liminal space. So when a couple or someone has discovered or experienced betrayal, they are cast out of that world. This is the world that they made sense of, the world where they knew all the rules, they knew their role in it, they understood it. And then all of a sudden, in a moment's time, upon the discovery of betrayal in some form, they're cast out into this empty space. Now, bear in mind that the liminal space is a point in time when I'm neither this, but not yet that. It is not fun to be there. I can't tell up from down, left from right. I question everything. I thought I was a good spouse, a good partner. I thought I was a good sexual partner. I thought we had a good thing going. I don't know now. And what's interesting about this experience, and this isn't something that I go over a whole in detail or in depth in the very beginning of couple recovery, but I think the couples we work with eventually start to understand that the betrayal that they're feeling initially began with the discovery of the infidelity or the sexual addiction, but they start to realize that they feel betrayed by much more than that, the entire world that they were in existence, because nothing is making sense to them anymore. They start questioning how they make sense of God, for example, or they're questioning how they make sense of family relationships and friendships, and so many other things get thrown into question here, and it is not fun being in that position. And that's where recovery comes in and why recovery is so important, because recovery is there to help you move out of that space where you can't tell up from down, left from right, and start moving forward into the new world, the new place, this new place that you're going to live and build your life. So, what's interesting about that is that the old relationship, I mean, the old world that you were cast out from, there's a lot of certainty involved in that. You knew how things worked there. You knew how you function there, and now you're certain that you don't want to go back there because you don't trust it anymore. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But the new world is full of ambiguity and full of uncertainty, and a lot of times it's got the same players involved, the same relationships, but you can't make sense of anything. There's a new set of rules and a new set of values and so many other things, especially involving the couple relationship and how that's going to work in this new space. um, so I'm getting a question that's coming through, and that's what I was doing, was reading that. It says, prior to our relationship, um, this particular person's spouse visited prostitutes and wanted to know which countries he did this in, and it said it had nothing to. He said it had nothing to do with their relationship, and we are in our recoveries and trying to rebuild trust, and they wanted me to comment on that. So if you haven't done disclosure or formal disclosure, that would be where that comes in knowing where this person was or what they were doing, what they were involved in. But in the process of doing a formal disclosure, and for those of you who don't know what a formal disclosure is, it's usually a pretty intense therapeutic event where the person, that the sex addict, for example, or the person who had cheated, will disclose all information to their spouse. These are all my secrets. But one thing I want you to keep in mind on disclosure is that the way we do disclosure is that what is disclosed, we say, has to have a therapeutic value. It has to have a therapeutic purpose for why it's being disclosed. And so a lot of times the nitty gritty, or the what has often been referred to as the dirty details, can have no therapeutic value and can often be more harmful. So, for example, places might be one of those where this happened. If infidelity happened on, all 7 continents, that might make it hard for you to travel out of the country to a different continent. And so there was a particular situation I was working with where the addict was going to disclose the nationality of their acting out partner, and or sometimes we call that the affair partner. And I suggested that he not do that because, when your spouse runs into someone of that nationality, it could trigger the infidelity or the wound, and make it really difficult for them. And he was so thankful that I did that, because she had a really good friend that was of that nationality, and it potentially could have affected that relationship. So the point of disclosure isn't, sometimes you think like it's impossible to tell everything because the spouse wasn't there when it happened. So you can't give all the information even if you tried. which I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. The spirit of disclosure is to let the secrets out. Say, this is what I was up to. These are the secrets that I kept. And it's very important to work with a therapist that knows what they're doing when it comes to disclosure, so they can create the therapeutic environment to have that session. So I hope that I did your question justice on how to handle a situation like that. So here we are talking about the liminal space, this point in time where you're neither this nor that, and how recovery is going to push you forward into the new space. But there's a lot of hesitancy because it's scary to go into that new space because you don't know the rules there yet. And so that's where trust comes in, where couples are ready to trust again. It's not fun being in that type of relationship where the lines of trust have been severed. And so what I informed them fairly quickly is that you don't get to have trust right now. In this liminal space, when this is where you are, what you have is what we call transitional distrust. And so the one reason why I like this word transitional is to let you know that it's temporary. It's not going to be like this forever. But you are in a situation where you're not going to trust for a while. But the key here is that you can have or better determine what type of distrust you're experiencing. And I'm going to go over that with you right now, because as a therapist, a couples therapist, I'm looking for one particular type over the other. There's one type that I'm going to go over first that you don't want, and you're going to know you don't want it as soon as it happens. And there's another type that is not fun. It's not pleasant because it's still distrust, but it should signal you that you might be headed toward the new world and toward health and happiness. So let's talk about those real quickly. The first one is, and bear with me here because I'm going to get really unsophisticated in my verbiage, but I think this really resonates with my clients when I talk to them like with this terminology. So the first type is what I call the all hell no type. It's a very big emotional response. Remember what I said earlier, that the old world has predictability and certainty involved in it. That is what this expression reflects. All hell no. They are certain they don't want that. And the reason why is because whatever they're experiencing from their spouse or partner is more of the same. They're recognizing as this is coming from the old world. This is more of the same, and more of the same gets me more of the same. And look where I am now, and I don't want that. I don't have any part of that, and it's usually a very big emotional response. And so we don't want to see that as part of recovery. We don't want to see the all hell no form of distrust or transitional distrust. What we want to see is the what the hell type of distrust. And so as I said before, the more the same version, there's predictability and certainty involved in that expression. The what the hell version, you can hear the ambiguity there, the confusion. I don't quite know how to make sense of what I'm experiencing from you right now. It can still be a fairly big emotional reaction, but what you're looking for is that confusion and ambiguity and kind of deer in the headlights. And usually that's coming because you're presenting something that's new and different. And guess what? I don't trust it. If I'm on the receiving end of infidelity, if I'm the wounded spouse, I don't want to have anything to do with something new in the beginning of recovery. I don't trust it, because I don't trust anything right now, especially involving the spouse. But going back to certainty versus uncertainty, I know I will never be able to trust the more of the same type stuff. I might be able to learn to trust something that's new and different. And so when I see that happening in a couple relationship, I start to point out that that could mean that they're actually making progress because they're experiencing the other person in ways they never have before. And that's a very important part of couple recovery. So that brings us to this, what we call this journey towards self discovery. And so, as you can see, with the analogy of the two worlds, it's a journey, it's a process, and it's journeying from something old and saying goodbye to that and into something new, something different, and welcoming that into. And there's a lot of discovery, there's a lot of self discovery, and there's a lot of couple discovery on that, on how the new couple relationship is going to work. I really like what Esther Perel said in her TED Talk when she said, I would no more recommend you have an affair than I would recommend you have cancer. And yet we know that people who have been ill often talk about how their illness has yielded them a new perspective. I look at affairs from a dual perspective, hurt and betrayal on one side and self-discovery on the other. And I couldn't agree more with her on that. It's hard for the couple to see the growth and self-discovery part in the beginning because things are so painful. But that's how we want to, that's the direction we want to move things into. And so here we are back at the liminal space. And as we're addressing this journey towards self-discovery and understanding this process, we need to answer a question. And that question is, when were you cast out? When did it happen to you? We know for the wounded spouse, it often happened up on the discovery of the infidelity, up on the discovery of the acting out behavior. But more often than not, the person that committed the act of infidelity or the acts of infidelity, they have been caught up in that liminal space for a long time. And that's really important to understand because what that means is that chances are they weren't experiencing the relationship in the same way that their spouse was experiencing the relationship. Because if they're in that empty space, that means they are dealing with a lot of dissatisfaction and discontent in their life. And what happens is they create the double life to deal with it because if they introduce their dissatisfaction or discontent, and I'm not saying dissatisfaction or discontent in the relationship, I'm talking about kind of an overall dissatisfaction or discontent. And a lot of times that's due to trauma that goes all the way back to childhood at times. But if they introduce that into their life, then it creates disruption, and they are trying not to do that. So they create the double life, the secret life, and they put on a face and so do it so well at times that they often will believe it themselves, that they are content and happy with the way things are. But I haven't heard any addict that I've worked with yet say that they're okay with that part of their life, that's something that they're proud of or happy with. It's just not the case. Most of them are very unhappy with this part of their story and can't believe that it is even part of their story. And so that's important to understand. And let me show you why. Because one of the most common questions we get from the partners of the addict is, why aren't you more upset about this? So they're experiencing something from the acting out spouse that's very different or not validating in terms of what they're feeling. It seems like they're not as upset about what has happened. Can't you see what I'm dealing with? Can't you see the pain you have caused me, the hurt, the wound that you have caused me? And the reason for that is they are often dealing with two different types of loss. And I believe Esther Perel also talks about this. And so I'm going to go over those real quickly. The wounded partner is dealing with all these losses that you're seeing on your screen. So their loss of their self, their marriage, their dreams and ideals, and their general sense of safety in one moment's time is just gone. And it's very traumatic. And it's a deep wound that really derails them. But the acting out partner is usually just grieving one thing, and that's hurting my spouse. Remember that the acting out spouse has been in the liminal space for a long time. They're ready to be done with that. They're ready to have a life that's satisfying. They're ready to get out of that space. Meanwhile, the wounded partner is just now entering into that space. And so it's two very different experiences with loss. It's not to say that the acting out partner isn't dealing with any fears of loss, like fears of losing their spouse, but those fears are different from grief. They're fearing things that have yet to happen versus grieving things that have already happened. But on top of that, they also find reason to celebrate because they're finally broke free of this secret life that they've never really been happy with. And so they find themselves caught up in a lot of mixed emotions about feeling good and feeling relief and some semblance of peace and satisfaction. Meanwhile, looking at their spouse and looking at all the damages they've caused them and hurt them. So one reason why spouses are asking that question of why aren't you more upset about this is because they're both experiencing two different types of loss. There you can see it on your screen as a side by side. So that brings us to these three hard realities in the new world. So as the couple have faced these types of losses, they're understanding more about the different types of losses they've experienced. They are moving into this new reality, and there are some hard realities here. There's a lot of them actually, but we in the beginning will often go over these three that are very important to understand when it comes to the rules and how the new world works. The first hard reality is that everyone is capable of anything. That's difficult because that also applies to the wounded spouse. That goes back to the quote I said earlier from a friend of mine, a colleague of mine, that would say that we're all one bad decision away from messing up our lives. So everyone is capable of anything. There are no guarantees we're always going to operate from the standpoint of sanity and reality. In other words, it's possible for all of us to go out of our mind, so as long as we have one. So with that in mind, it's difficult to acknowledge that I never will truly know someone fully, and that includes my spouse or my partner. That, in other words, that if I know that this type of thing could happen to me, could happen again, it could be me, or whatever the circumstances may be, they often find themselves battling with the reality that they don't know what's cooking upstairs in their brains. And so that's how it is for everybody that is facing the true reality of how relationships work. So once that curtain has been pulled back, it gets real difficult facing the realities that they're seeing before them. So that brings to the third hard reality when it comes to trust. And I'd talk about trust. That trust is no longer something that just happens to me. It is also something I choose. And so think of it as early on in a relationship, especially before the curtains have been pulled back. If you can see my hands here, that trust is like, it kind of starts fusing together organically, where this represents a healthy, tight-knit, trusting relationship. And then when an act of infidelity or betrayal happens, it severs that line, and couples find themselves having to build it back. But some of it will happen organically, but a lot of times couples get to this last piece and they can't figure out how to lock it in. And that is because they're in a position now with this new world that they're living in and these hard realities that they're facing, where they realize that locking in that last piece is actually something I am consciously going to have to choose to do. That we've done our work, we've worked hard to rebuild what we can organically, but now I have to lock it in by choosing to trust that person. In other words, I know now that anything's possible. Everyone's capable of anything. I don't know everything that's going on in their head. I'm going to have to choose to trust them anyways. And that's a difficult thing to do, but that's the position you'll find yourself in any future relationship at this point. Once the curtains get pulled back, you can't close them anymore. But I also think that is true trust. Before that, people are often trusting in an illusion, the illusion of certainty that this would never happen to us, never happen to me, my spouse would never do that. And now you're realizing that this can happen to anybody. And now when I trust, it is a real genuine trust because I know the reality of the situation. So as you move forward in recovery, I want to encourage you to seek out professional attention. I like what Rebecca Rosenblatt said in her book, Overcoming Betrayal, where she says all wounds can be healed, but you have to be willing to go into the painful center to clean out the wound or it will fester and keep causing pain. And I couldn't agree more with her. And so this is the type of wound that really needs someone helping you along. Most people aren't finding themselves getting better doing it themselves. And so these are a few things that we address in the couple recovery in our program. And I like to just bring attention to the new love affair. That's the bullet point that we spend the most time on in couple recovery, is helping them build their new relationship together, their new life, this different set of rules, this different set of understanding, something that they can get behind and live in with longevity. And that's where we spend the majority of our time in the programs that we do, which also includes our couples weekend that we do, the affair recovery or the betrayal trauma couples intensive that we do, 3 to 4 days where we do, it's designed to help couples transition. In fact, we'll even go over some of those slides that I showed you to help them transition. That's the whole point of it, to help push them forward out of the empty space and into the new world. And you can check out that intensive on our website. But there's so many other people that are available to you to help you in your area. Now, I have a lot of confidence in the CSAT community, which stands for Certified Sex Addiction Therapists. And you can search them out by going to the website sexhelp.com and finding someone in your area that knows how to work with this issue and knows how to move forward, help you move forward with it. And then, of course, you're more than welcome to, I know the Center for Healthy Sex, they're a very good resource to have. You're more than welcome to contact me, and I can also serve as a resource for you, because you don't want to hang out in that liminal space too long, because you might find yourself being there for a long time. One thing that I tell people a lot, one adage that I like, is that you only have to be brave 5 seconds at a time. It's the 5 seconds it took for you to register for this webinar. It's the 5 seconds it took for you to show up today. Keep taking those 5 seconds of courage. Do something next when we're done with this today. Watch the next webinar. Call a therapist. Inquire. Start moving forward in your couple recovery. If we have time, I have there's one question that's been asked on here that I would like to answer, if we can, real quickly, where the person says, my boyfriend and I have experienced many infidelities while he's in active addiction. He seems to think that he should be forgiven because he only does this during his active addiction. What are your thoughts? He has relapsed several times and has only been clean for a few months, in treatment at least 10 times, and currently using again. How long is a person expected to continue to support the addict and continue to work on trust again, only for it to be broken again and again? He says, I can't be in a relationship where you don't trust me and you need to move forward. Well, what I would tell you, first of all, is that, like I said earlier, you get to fight for it as long as you feel like you have fight in you. And if it's important, the relationship's important to you, you can fight for it. But I'm not certain, because I haven't spoken to this person, but those comments of where people say you need to move forward, you need to get over it, those are often manipulative strategies to help protect the addiction. So what I would encourage you to do, if that's your story, is go start your recovery. Start working with a sex addiction therapist to help them help you know how to set the right kind of boundaries and expectations and have that support system available to you so that you can make the changes for yourself. Because sometimes the changes you make for yourself will stir things up enough to get changes going in the couple relationship. So I hope that helps. Thank you all for having me, and thank you for your questions. And feel free to email me or ask any questions that you may have. I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope and I wish you well on your recovery journey.